When morning arrived, sunlight streamed through the blinds, marking the start of what seemed like an ordinary day. By 2 p.m., though, Taylor began to feel uneasy. Something about the lingering silence in the lower level felt off. Reaching the guest room door, he gave a polite knock. No answer. He waited a few moments, then knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Concern growing, Taylor gently turned the knob and pushed the door open. The first thing he saw was the disarray of the bed. That was when he noticed the blanket lying awkwardly on the floor near the corner. Something about the way it was positioned struck him as wrong. His heart began to race. Moving closer, he reached down and lifted the blanket. What he saw beneath froze him in place. Danielle was lying on the floor. For a long moment, Taylor couldn't process what he was seeing. His mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe she had fainted. Maybe she was just unconscious. But instinct told him something was terribly wrong. Dear viewers, thank you for choosing our video and our channel. We put a lot of effort into making sure you enjoy being with us. Danielle Finley Jones entered the world on October 20th, 1991, in the quiet suburb of Cranebrook, Western Sydney, a community known for its close-knit families and hard-working residents. From the very beginning, Danielle's life seemed filled with promise. She was the second child in a small family of 4, growing up alongside her older brother Blake, who would later become one of the most influential people in her life. Blake had always been protective, stepping into a role that often felt like part sibling, part guardian, especially after their parents' separation. From an early age, Danielle displayed a natural love for movement and competition. She was constantly active, playing everything from basketball and netball to athletics, but it was soccer that captured her heart. What began as a childhood pastime soon turned into a defining part of her identity. The local soccer club didn't have a dedicated girls' team at the time, so Danielle played alongside boys, often proving she could run faster, kick harder, and lead with confidence. Over time, Danielle's talent blossomed. She became team captain, guided younger players, and won several regional awards that celebrated her leadership and sportsmanship. In 2017, her dedication paid off in a new way. She was chosen to be the face of a national promotional campaign celebrating women's soccer in Australia. It was a proud moment for both her and her family, symbolizing years of hard work and quiet ambition finally being recognized. After completing high school, Danielle pursued her education at the University of Sydney, majoring in education and social work. She wanted to make a difference, to guide others just as her mentors had guided her. During her university years, she volunteered at youth centers and continued coaching junior soccer teams, merging her love for teaching with her passion for teamwork. Upon graduating, she began her career as a teacher in a local school, quickly earning a reputation as someone both compassionate and disciplined. Parents trusted her, colleagues respected her, and her students adored her for her patience and encouragement. As Danielle entered her 30s, her life appeared almost complete. She had built a steady career, achieved financial independence, and maintained a warm circle of friends who admired her optimism. Yet beneath the surface of her success, there lingered an unshakable feeling of loneliness. She began to dream about starting a family of her own, someone to share her mornings, her victories, and her quiet evenings with. Despite her independence, Danielle longed for a deep emotional connection, the kind of partnership built on trust and shared dreams. Although she had dated in the past, most of her relationships had been short-lived. Danielle was goal-driven, and if a relationship began to interfere with her priorities, she had no hesitation in ending it. But now, for the first time, she wanted something lasting, a bond that could withstand the challenges of time and circumstance. Like many others in the digital age, Danielle was active on social media. Her Instagram and Facebook pages reflected a life full of energy. Pictures from soccer tournaments, classroom events, and weekend hikes with friends. She received countless messages and friendly compliments, yet she often dismissed them, unsure of people's true intentions. Encouraged by friends who had found love online, Danielle decided to give Tinder a try. Her approach was cautious at first. She matched with a few people, chatted politely, and even went on a couple of casual dates, but nothing felt genuine. That changed the day she met Ashley Goy. Ashley was 4 years older, charismatic, and seemed genuinely interested in her life. His messages were thoughtful and engaging, filled with humor and kindness. After a week of conversation, he suggested they meet in person. Their first date went effortlessly. They talked for hours in a small Sydney cafe, discovering shared interests in travel, sports, and volunteering. Ashley's charm was disarming, and Danielle found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone in years. Friends who saw them together described them as perfectly matched. And even Danielle's mother, Jacqueline, was impressed when she met Ashley. He was polite, attentive, and appeared to care deeply for her daughter. However, as the weeks went by, subtle changes began to appear in Ashley's behavior. He started asking more questions about where she went, who she talked to, and what she wore. At first, Danielle brushed it off as protectiveness, even finding it somewhat flattering that someone cared so much. It was a new experience for her, someone showing such intensity of interest. What she didn't yet realize was that this intensity masked control. Within just a month of dating, Ashley's personality began to shift. He became possessive, insisting that Danielle spend less time with her friends and focus more on their relationship. He wanted to know her daily schedule in detail and often called just to check in. Danielle, inexperienced in long-term relationships, didn't recognize these early warning signs. She saw his possessiveness as passion rather than control. To her, it felt like a new kind of love, raw, consuming, and devoted. For the first few weeks of their relationship, Ashley continued to present himself as the perfect partner, attentive, compassionate, and deeply invested in Danielle's future. He often spoke about his dream of starting a family, describing in detail how much he longed to build a peaceful home filled with love and stability. To Danielle, those words felt like music. They reflected everything she wanted but had struggled to find: commitment, tenderness, and the promise of a lasting connection. Hearing Ashley speak with such certainty about the future made her trust him even more deeply. He seemed like the kind of man she had always believed existed but had never met in real life. Still, not everyone in Danielle's life shared her optimism. One of her closest friends, Emma, began to notice subtle changes in Ashley's behavior whenever he thought no one was paying attention. His charm, which had seemed effortless at first, sometimes slipped into unease, his laughter fading into cold silence if Danielle spoke to another man, even in passing. He grew tense when she didn't answer her phone immediately, or when she made spontaneous plans without consulting him. To Emma, it was clear that Ashley's affection came with invisible strings attached. On several occasions, she gently tried to raise her concerns, telling Danielle that something about Ashley felt unpredictable. But Danielle, blinded by affection, brushed it off, saying that Emma simply didn't understand how serious this relationship was. Over the course of their first month together, Danielle proudly introduced Ashley to her mother, Jacqueline, and a handful of close friends. However, most of her broader social circle knew him only through the glowing stories she shared online. Photos of weekend getaways, cheerful captions, and carefully chosen words that painted the picture of a perfect couple. Danielle's posts radiated happiness, and her friends celebrated her new love, unaware that beneath the surface, tension was already building. On Saturday, December 17th, 2022, Danielle organized a casual night out with her friends at a well-known city bar. The plan was simple: good food, music, and laughter before the holidays. It was also the night she planned to formally introduce Ashley to more of her close circle. She spent extra time getting ready that evening, excited and slightly nervous. For her, this was a milestone, a symbolic gesture that confirmed her relationship was becoming something real and permanent. The bar was buzzing with energy when they arrived. Laughter mixed with music, and the scent of food filled the air. Danielle's friends greeted her warmly and welcomed Ashley with open curiosity. To everyone's surprise, Ashley was perfectly charming. He smiled easily, engaged in light conversation, and even helped the staff carry over an extra chair for someone who arrived late. To the group, he seemed considerate, confident, and genuine. Throughout the night, he and Danielle sat close together, sharing small touches and affectionate glances that seemed to reflect deep connection. It was the kind of scene that looked like the beginning of a beautiful love story. For Danielle, it was a proud moment. She had never introduced any of her past boyfriends to her wider group of friends, knowing those earlier relationships weren't serious. This time, however, was different. She spoke of Ashley almost as if he were her future fiancé, surprising some of her friends, who exchanged looks of disbelief. Still, they respected her happiness and decided not to question it. The evening carried on with cheerful conversation, drinks, and laughter echoing above the music. Late into the night, someone from the group suggested playing a light-hearted party game, a social icebreaker involving spontaneous and sometimes provocative questions that everyone would answer in turn. It was meant to be fun and slightly mischievous, not serious. The friends laughed as each question grew more daring. It was the kind of game that encouraged openness, helping everyone relax and bond. When it came to Danielle's turn, one of her friends playfully asked, "Have you ever had a one-night encounter with a stranger?" The laughter in the group quieted instantly, waiting for her answer. Danielle blushed, hesitated, and then gave a shy smile before admitting softly, "Yes, once, a long time ago." Her answer was honest and harmless, a simple confession shared in the spirit of fun. But in that instant, everything changed. Ashley's entire demeanor shifted. His friendly smile faded, his shoulders tensed, and a strange coldness washed over his face. Those sitting nearby noticed the change immediately. His expression hardened, and the warmth in his eyes disappeared. Without warning, he turned sharply toward Danielle and began questioning her in a tone that startled everyone. What began as confusion quickly escalated into anger masked as disappointment. He accused her of being dishonest, saying that she had once denied having any such experiences during their early conversations. His voice rose slightly, and the easy mood of the room evaporated. At first, Danielle thought he was joking, but as the seconds passed, it became clear that he was not. His words cut sharply, filled with judgment that made her feel both embarrassed and cornered. Her friends looked around in disbelief, unsure how to respond. It was uncomfortable, an emotional shift so sudden that it left the group frozen. Danielle's face turned pale. She tried to explain that the question had been part of a harmless game, that her past had nothing to do with their present, but Ashley wouldn't listen. Ashley's tone grew more severe. He began to accuse Danielle of lying and of disrespecting him in front of everyone. Some of the guests tried to intervene, reminding him that it was all just a game and that no harm was meant. But Ashley was unreachable in that moment, his emotions spiraling out of proportion. Danielle, always the peacemaker, tried to calm him down, speaking softly and apologizing even though she had done nothing wrong. Yet her words only seemed to fuel his frustration. After a few tense moments, he abruptly stood up, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out of the bar. The room fell silent. Everyone sat in awkward disbelief. Danielle's friends looked at her with concern, but she tried to brush it off, forcing a shaky smile. She apologized repeatedly for the uncomfortable scene, saying that Ashley was probably just overwhelmed or embarrassed. "He's not usually like this," she explained quietly. "Maybe it's just nerves from meeting everyone." Still, she could see the doubt in her friend's eyes. A few minutes later, Ashley began sending her text messages, short, heated, and emotional. Danielle, worried that the situation might escalate, told her friends she was going to find him and talk things through. She stepped outside into the cool night air, disappearing for about 15 minutes. When she finally returned, Ashley was with her. His expression had softened, and he acted as though nothing had happened. The two rejoined the group, sat close again, and continued their conversations as if the argument had never occurred. The others exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. It was easier to move on than to reopen the wound. The rest of the night passed quietly. Ashley was calm, attentive even, occasionally laughing and making small talk. Yet beneath the surface, everyone could feel a lingering tension, a sense that something had cracked between them, something delicate and unseen. As the clock struck midnight, the group began to disperse. Since Danielle had a long way to travel home that night, she decided it would be safer and more convenient to stay over at her friend Taylor's house. She wasn't alone. Her boyfriend Ashley agreed to join her, and Taylor, ever the hospitable host, had no objection. Taylor lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, about a 20-minute drive from the bar where they had all spent the evening. The air was cool, the streets dimly lit, and the faint sound of crickets echoed through the otherwise peaceful night as they made their way there. Taylor's girlfriend, Rachel, who had chosen not to drink that evening, offered to drive everyone home. She was responsible and kind-hearted, the sort of person who always made sure everyone got home safely. When they arrived, Taylor led them downstairs to a spacious guest room he had prepared earlier. It was warm and inviting. Soft lighting, a neatly made queen-sized bed, and a small adjoining bathroom that gave the space a comfortable, private feel. The small windows near the ceiling let in just enough light from the street lamps to cast a faint glow across the carpet. For a guest room, it felt unexpectedly cozy. Danielle smiled appreciatively, clearly touched by the effort. She and Ashley thanked Taylor and Rachel before settling in. Despite the minor disagreement that had erupted between the couple at the bar earlier that night, they appeared calm now. Perhaps a little weary, but peaceful. Laughter even returned briefly as they unpacked a few things and prepared to sleep. To anyone watching, it would have seemed that the tension from earlier was completely forgotten. Around 3 a.m., however, Taylor stirred awake. A faint, unusual noise had reached his ears from somewhere downstairs. It wasn't loud, more like the thump of movement or a muffled sound through the floorboards. Rachel, half asleep beside him, opened her eyes and glanced toward him with a questioning look. "Did you hear that?" she murmured. Taylor listened for a few moments longer. The noise came again, then stopped. After a few tense seconds, the silence returned. Convinced it was probably nothing, a door shifting, the house settling, or perhaps the guests moving in their sleep, Taylor decided not to overthink it. The couple soon drifted back to sleep. When morning arrived, sunlight streamed through the blinds, marking the start of what seemed like an ordinary day. It was already past 10:30 a.m. when Taylor finally woke up for good. Rachel yawned, stretching beside him, and asked casually whether Danielle and Ashley were already up. Taylor shrugged, assuming they were still asleep after a late night. They made coffee, chatted quietly, and let time pass without interruption. Noon came and went, and there was still no sign of their guests. The closed door downstairs didn't seem concerning. After all, it wasn't uncommon for people to sleep in after a night out. By 2 p.m., though, Taylor began to feel uneasy. Something about the lingering silence in the lower level felt off. He decided to check on them, telling Rachel he'd be right back. Descending the stairs, he noticed the faint echo of his own footsteps on the wooden floor. Reaching the guest room door, he gave a polite knock. No answer. He waited a few moments, then knocked again. Louder this time. Still nothing. Concern growing, Taylor gently turned the knob and pushed the door open. The first thing he saw was the disarray of the bed. The sheets were tangled and partly hanging to the floor. Danielle's clothes were draped neatly over a chair, her purse on the nightstand, and her shoes were placed side by side near the wall, as if she had planned to leave soon. The air felt strangely still, as though the room itself was holding its breath. A chill ran through Taylor's body as he took a cautious step forward. That was when he noticed the blanket lying awkwardly on the floor near the corner. Something about the way it was positioned struck him as wrong. His heart began to race. Moving closer, he reached down and lifted the blanket. What he saw beneath froze him in place. Danielle was lying on the floor. For a long moment, Taylor couldn't process what he was seeing. His mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe she had fainted. Maybe she was just unconscious. But instinct told him something was terribly wrong. He called out her name, his voice breaking the silence, but there was no response. Panic surged through him. Ashley was nowhere in sight, and one of the small windows above the bed stood half open, the curtains gently swaying in the breeze. The realization hit him all at once. Someone had left in the middle of the night. Taylor bolted upstairs, his face pale. Rachel, startled by the look on his face, demanded to know what was happening. Barely able to form words, Taylor explained what he'd found. Rachel immediately grabbed her phone and called emergency services. Her hands were shaking, her voice trembling as she spoke to the dispatcher. They were told to wait outside for help to arrive. But deep down, both of them knew it might already be too late. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly confirmed the worst. Danielle had passed away hours earlier, sometime around 3 a.m. The same time Taylor and Rachel had heard those strange noises in the night. That haunting realization would stay with them for years to come. If only they had checked then. Perhaps things could have been different. The authorities soon began their investigation. Fingerprints, phone records, witness accounts, each piece slowly began to reveal the truth. The scene itself told a story that no one wanted to believe. There were clear signs that Ashley had been responsible for what had happened. He hadn't made much effort to conceal his movements afterward. Investigators found traces in the bathroom sink that showed he had tried to clean himself up before escaping. The fingerprints left on the open window frame matched his exactly. A nearby neighbor later came forward with a statement. Around 4:30 that morning, they had seen a man walking quickly down the street, heading toward the main road. The dim streetlight made it difficult to see his face clearly, but his clothes matched the description of what Ashley had been wearing earlier that night at the bar. A dark jacket, jeans, and white sneakers. Detectives dug deeper. They obtained data from Ashley's phone, which revealed something even more disturbing. Around 4 a.m., less than an hour after the noise Taylor had heard, Ashley had called his mother. The recording of that conversation captured him in a frantic, emotional state. He was crying and repeating over and over that he hadn't done anything wrong. His words were confusing, inconsistent, as though he were arguing with himself. He claimed that someone else had entered the room and harmed Danielle, and that he had only discovered her afterward. To investigators, it sounded less like a statement of truth and more like a desperate attempt to deny what had just occurred. What Ashley didn't realize was that his phone remained on after the call ended, allowing authorities to trace his location. Using that signal, police eventually tracked him to a remote mountainous area several hours away. The region was isolated, with winding roads and dense trees, an unlikely place for anyone to go unless they were trying to disappear. It seemed clear that Ashley had intended to hide there until he could figure out what to do next. Police eventually located Ashley near a remote scenic overlook that towered above a steep, rocky cliff. The location was quiet, almost eerily so, an isolated viewpoint surrounded by whispering pine trees and distant city lights flickering far below. When officers arrived, their flashlights caught sight of him standing near the metal safety barrier, his posture tense, his eyes vacant. Before anyone could speak, Ashley climbed over the railing in a single, desperate motion and clung to the outer edge, his body trembling as he threatened to jump if anyone took another step toward him. The officers immediately halted. Their radios crackled with urgency as backup units and trained negotiators were called to the scene. Within an hour, a perimeter was established. The glow of red and blue lights reflected off the rocks, painting the night in uneasy colors. A team of crisis intervention specialists and psychologists soon arrived, their voices calm and steady, trained to reach those standing at the edge, literally and figuratively, of breaking down completely. The negotiations stretched on for nearly 12 hours. As midnight approached, fatigue began to overcome him. His movements grew slower, his grip weaker. At a crucial moment, when he turned slightly toward one of the negotiators, officers took the opportunity to act. With precision and timing, they lunged forward, grabbing him and pulling him back to safety. The scene erupted in shouts of relief and tension as he was finally restrained on solid ground. Ashley's behavior afterward was chaotic and unpredictable. He screamed incoherently, cried, and resisted the officers' attempts to calm him. It was clear to everyone present that he was in no state to answer questions. For his own safety, and the safety of others, he was transported to a psychiatric care facility where doctors and specialists could stabilize him. Over the next several days, medical professionals observed Ashley closely. He was agitated, restless, and prone to emotional outbursts. Once his condition stabilized, psychiatrists determined that his mental state had been dangerously unstable at the time of his arrest. Their reports concluded that had the officers hesitated even a few more minutes, he might have followed through with his threat. As the investigation continued, deeper psychological assessments were conducted. Over time, Experts diagnosed Ashley with several mental health disorders, including a severe form of emotional dysregulation and impulsive personality disturbance. In clinical terms, his condition manifested as sudden, uncontrollable episodes of rage and aggression, followed by periods of extreme remorse or denial. The diagnosis painted a disturbing but revealing picture of his mindset. When investigators delved further into his past, what they discovered was both tragic and alarming. Danielle was not Ashley's first victim. Over the previous few years, more than 10 women had filed police reports against him. These reports detailed patterns of violent outbursts, controlling behavior, and obsessive tendencies. Many of these women had sought legal protection, pleading for restraining orders or police intervention. Some of the cases had been quietly withdrawn, often because the victims feared retaliation or had been persuaded that Ashley would change. Ashley's background revealed years of instability. He had grown up in a turbulent household without a father figure. His mother, though caring, had struggled to manage his behavior from an early age. Teachers noted his temper and difficulty handling rejection. By adolescence, those issues had intensified. He had frequent conflicts at school and episodes of aggression toward his peers. Sadly, much of this went unaddressed, dismissed as teenage anger. Between 2015 and 2021, at least 11 separate complaints were filed against him for threats and physical altercations. In several of those cases, the victims eventually dropped their charges, either out of fear, exhaustion, or misplaced hope that he would change. A few others obtained restraining orders, but enforcement proved difficult. Ashley would often violate these boundaries without consequence, showing an unsettling disregard for authority. In early 2021, one of his partners took the matter to court after he assaulted her during an argument. The case resulted in a guilty verdict, but the punishment was lenient: a fine, community service, and an order to avoid contact with the victim. The minimal consequence did little to deter him. By 2022, his pattern of behavior continued. After another breakup, Ashley showed up uninvited at his ex-girlfriend's home late at night. He attempted to force entry but was stopped when her parents woke up and intervened. Authorities were called immediately, and he was taken into custody. Even then, the judicial system imposed another mild sentence: 6 months behind bars. He served less than 4 before being released once again. Only a few weeks later, he met Danielle Finley Jones. What followed would become one of the most widely discussed criminal cases in the region. The tragedy involving Danielle captured national attention. News stations ran continuous coverage of the investigation, and online forums buzzed with outrage over how many opportunities had been missed to prevent what happened. During the long and painstaking investigation, police received a wave of unexpected calls. One after another, 14 additional women came forward, each bravely revealing that they too had been intimidated by Ashley Goy at different points in time. For years, they had remained silent, some out of fear of retaliation, others convinced that no one would believe them. The renewed attention surrounding the case finally gave them the courage to speak. Their stories, though told separately, shared chilling similarities. Each woman described how Ashley initially presented himself as an ideal partner: polite, attentive, and charming to the point of seeming almost too good to be true. In the beginning, he was the kind of man who opened doors, remembered birthdays, and offered comforting words when life became difficult. Yet, beneath that carefully crafted image hid a darker reality. After a few meetings, the mask would slip. Small controlling behaviors appeared first: constant check-ins, possessiveness, and jealousy disguised as affection. Soon after, those behaviors evolved into manipulation and intimidation. Remarkably, in all the accounts collected, investigators noticed one unsettling pattern. Ashley never used weapons of any kind. He relied solely on his physical strength, intimidation, and psychological dominance. It was as if he found satisfaction in control itself, proof of power rather than the use of objects or tools. His ability to manipulate emotions made him even more dangerous, because to the outside world, he continued to appear calm, reasonable, and composed. As the trial date approached, the courtroom became a focal point for national attention. Many of Ashley's previous victims appeared in court, some traveling from other states to testify. Their courage in confronting him face to face after years of silence was widely praised. Some trembled as they spoke. Others held photographs or letters they had written years earlier but never had the chance to deliver. Their primary fear was the same: that Ashley might once again escape serious punishment. Several victims voiced concerns that the legal system, which had repeatedly failed to protect them in the past, might find yet another loophole or leniency that would allow him to walk free. They worried that if released, he would come after them again. These women had lived with anxiety for years, always looking over their shoulders, and this trial represented not only justice for Danielle, but also closure for themselves. The courtroom atmosphere was tense. Journalists filled the benches, sketch artists captured the expressions of the witnesses, and cameras waited outside to record every update. For once, it seemed that justice would not be delayed. The evidence against Ashley was overwhelming. DNA traces, digital communications, eyewitness statements, and forensic records all pointed directly to him. Even his own contradictory accounts during questioning only deepened his guilt. Prosecutors described him as a manipulative offender who had evaded accountability for years through charm and deceit, but who now faced the consequences of his actions. Yet, just when the world expected the final chapter of this story to play out in court, a shocking twist emerged. On the morning of April 6, 2024, just days before his formal sentencing, Ashley was discovered lifeless in his prison cell. News of his death spread rapidly, igniting speculation across the country. Official reports confirmed that no prison staff had been present at the moment of the incident, and the circumstances surrounding it remained unclear. Although investigators did not immediately classify it as suspicious, questions lingered. Others suspected that tensions inside the facility may have played a role, especially after reports surfaced that he had clashed with several cellmates during his detention. Before his death, Ashley reportedly displayed no remorse. He maintained an air of arrogance, telling other inmates and even his lawyers that he expected to be declared mentally unfit for prison. He was convinced that he would be transferred to a psychiatric hospital where, in his view, conditions would be far more comfortable. Instead, his life came to a sudden and mysterious end before that ruling could ever be made. The morning of November 9, 2005, was a date that changed everything forever. At precisely 6:11 a.m., a distressed 911 call came through from the Gentry residence in Robinson, Texas. The caller was Darlene. Her voice, tight with fear, reported that something was terribly wrong. She told the dispatcher that she had woken to find the back door wide open and her husband, Keith, lying in bed, barely responsive. She mentioned that several of Keith's firearms appeared to be missing, adding to her alarm and confusion. When asked for details, Darlene explained that she had not slept beside her husband that night. Instead, she said, she had been in the same room watching a movie and dozed off in a recliner nearby. According to her, she awoke around 6 o'clock to the sound of silence, an eerie stillness that immediately unsettled her. When she walked toward the bedroom, she noticed the open door leading outside, cold air drifting in, and realized something was terribly wrong. Dear viewers, thank you for choosing our video and our channel. We put a lot of effort into making sure you enjoy being with us. Darlene Doska-Sile was born on November 2, 1974, in the heart of Central Texas, the middle child of 3 daughters in a family that valued kindness, faith, and hard work. Although she never officially competed in beauty pageants, Darlene earned the affectionate nickname Texas Beauty Queen. It wasn't just about her looks. It was the combination of personality and presence. Darlene joined the Flag Corps, volunteered to help organize school dances, and was often the first to raise her hand when someone needed a helping one. She was voted prom queen her senior year, an honor that didn't surprise anyone. When she graduated from Yo High School in Cameron in 1993, she had her whole future ahead of her, and she wasn't afraid to dream big. She enrolled at Texas State Technical College in Waco, determined to build a career in the healthcare field. Initially, she focused on dental studies, training as a dental assistant. It was during those college years that Darlene's life took an unexpected turn, one that would change everything. She met Keith Gentry. Keith had been born just 2 months earlier than Darlene, on September 2, 1974, in Waco, Texas. He grew up in the nearby town of Robinson, where values like family loyalty and community support ran deep. Keith was the son of Weeman and Glenda Gentry, and he had two sisters who adored him. He was known for being easygoing but dependable, the kind of young man everyone trusted. After high school, Keith also enrolled at Texas State Technical College, studying drafting and welding. When Darlene and Keith met, the spark was immediate. Their connection wasn't loud or rushed. It was something natural, the kind of relationship that felt meant to be. They laughed easily together, spent long evenings talking about their dreams, and quickly became inseparable. Their families were thrilled. Both saw in the other exactly the kind of person they had hoped their child would find. Over time, everyone assumed marriage was only a matter of when, not if. But life, as it often does, had other plans. By 1997, both Darlene and Keith had completed their studies and begun to think seriously about their next steps. Darlene, practical yet romantic, quietly hoped for a proposal. She had pictured the life they could build. A cozy home, maybe children one day, and a shared future filled with love and stability. Keith, however, wasn't quite ready. He cared deeply for Darlene, but felt unsure about the timing. He wanted to make sure he could offer her everything she deserved before taking that next step. Their differing expectations led to long, emotional conversations. Eventually, they decided, painfully, to part ways. It wasn't because of anger or betrayal, but because neither wanted to hold the other back. Their families were stunned. Friends couldn't imagine them apart. For both Darlene and Keith, the separation was devastating. Trying to move forward, Darlene relocated to Dallas, hoping a change of scenery would help her heal. She threw herself into her dental work, renting a small apartment and learning to navigate the city's faster pace. Yet despite her efforts, Dallas never quite felt like home. The constant noise, the impersonal streets, and a few unsettling experiences, including a car theft that left her shaken, made her long for the quiet predictability of Central Texas. After nearly a year, Darlene decided to return home. It was a decision made partly out of exhaustion and partly out of instinct. And as fate would have it, her path soon crossed again with Keith's. Their reunion was almost cinematic. What began as a chance meeting quickly turned into something undeniable. Both had grown, matured, and realized that what they once had was too rare to abandon. This time, there were no doubts. In 1999, Keith proposed, and not long after, they married in a ceremony surrounded by family and lifelong friends. The day felt like the perfect ending. Or perhaps, the perfect beginning. The couple soon bought their first home in Robinson, Texas, a peaceful community just outside Waco. It wasn't extravagant, but it was theirs. A single-story house with a tidy lawn, a white mailbox, and neighbors who waved from their porches. Life seemed good, even idyllic. Darlene continued her work as a dental assistant, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Her compassion for others had always been her driving force, and she wanted to do more. Encouraged by Keith, she enrolled again in college, this time to pursue her nursing degree. It wasn't easy juggling work, studies, and married life, but Darlene approached it all with determination. Keith, for his part, was immensely proud of his wife. He often told friends that Darlene inspired him to be better, to dream bigger. Together, they represented the kind of love story people admired. Steady, supportive, and genuine. They spent weekends visiting Keith's parents, who lived right next door, sharing dinners, laughter, and small-town moments that seemed simple yet special. By the early 2000s, the Gentrys appeared to have everything figured out. Yet beneath that peaceful surface, life in Robinson was about to grow more complicated. Living so close to family could be both a comfort and a challenge. Keith worked as an engineering assistant at a local electric utility company, a position that provided security and stability. Darlene, who had pursued her passion for healthcare, was now a registered nurse, respected for her compassion and tireless work ethic. Together, their combined incomes provided a comfortable life. They weren't lavish spenders, but they could afford small luxuries, family vacations, home projects, and weekend outings that brought them closer together. Family had always been the center of their world. In 2001, their first child, Chase, was born, a milestone that filled their hearts with joy and their home with laughter. 3 years later, in 2004, they welcomed Cody, and by 2005, their third son, Cade, completed the picture. Friends and neighbors saw the Gentrys as the picture-perfect family, attractive, successful, and deeply committed to one another. Keith was often seen mowing the yard with one of the boys in tow, while Darlene managed the household with what seemed like effortless grace. With help from both sets of grandparents, the young family built strong routines and traditions. Sunday dinners, birthday parties, and Little League games became cornerstones of their busy but happy life. Photographs from that period showed smiling faces, coordinated outfits, and the quiet pride of two parents who believed they were doing everything right. Yet, as with many families who seemed to have it all, there were struggles that outsiders never saw. Beneath the cheerful exterior, stress had begun to take root. Keith's position required frequent travel across Texas. Days away from home turned into weeks, and the time apart began to weigh on the marriage. Darlene managed nearly everything at home. Nursing shifts that stretched into the night, caring for 3 young boys, and handling the daily logistics of life. Even when Keith returned home, exhaustion often kept him distant. He needed rest, while Darlene needed help. The imbalance quietly eroded the closeness they once shared. Keith noticed it too. He was a responsible man, aware of how much his absence affected the household. By 2004, after long discussions and a fair amount of soul-searching, he made a decision that would change the family's dynamic. He chose to leave his higher-paying, travel-intensive position for a more modest, desk-based job that would allow him to stay home with his wife and children. It was an admirable choice, one rooted in love and practicality. But the consequences came quickly. The new job paid significantly less, and financial tension began to build. Keith, who had always taken pride in being the provider, felt the pressure of every dollar stretched thin. Meanwhile, Darlene's lifestyle habits didn't seem to adjust to the tighter budget. She enjoyed keeping their homes spotless and stylish, continued hosting small gatherings, and treated her family to things that kept life feeling normal. To her, maintaining appearances wasn't about vanity. It was about holding on to stability. But to Keith, those choices sometimes felt careless. Arguments began to surface, often revolving around money, priorities, and exhaustion. Friends noticed small changes. Darlene, once radiant and talkative, sometimes seemed distracted. Keith, normally patient, could grow quiet and withdrawn. Relatives would later recall subtle signs, a tone of irritation, an offhand remark, a forced smile during family gatherings. The tension wasn't explosive, but it was persistent, slowly wearing down the bond that had once been unshakable. Still, neither Keith nor Darlene ever spoke of separation. Keith remained deeply committed to his family, telling friends he would figure things out and that every marriage had its rough patches. To neighbors and co-workers, the Gentry still looked like a solid, loving household trying to balance the demands of work, money, and family life. Then came the morning of November 9th, 2005, a date that would forever change everything. At precisely 6:11 a.m., a distressed 911 call came through from the Gentry residence in Robinson, Texas. The caller was Darlene. Her voice, tight with fear, reported that something was terribly wrong. She told the dispatcher that she had woken to find the back door wide open and her husband, Keith, lying in bed, barely responsive. She mentioned that several of Keith's firearms appeared to be missing, adding to her alarm and confusion. When asked for details, Darlene explained that she had not slept beside her husband that night. Instead, she said, she had been in the same room watching a movie and dozed off in a recliner nearby. According to her, she awoke around 6 o'clock to the sound of silence, an eerie stillness that immediately unsettled her. When she walked toward the bedroom, she noticed the open door leading outside, cold air drifting in, and realized something was terribly wrong. Paramedics arrived at the Gentry home within minutes. Keith was still alive but unresponsive. Emergency personnel worked swiftly, stabilizing him as they transported him to Hillcrest Baptist Medical Center in Waco. Doctors immediately placed him on life support as family members rushed to the hospital, clinging to hope. For 2 long days, the waiting room filled with quiet prayers, disbelief, and desperate optimism. But despite every effort, Keith Gentry never regained consciousness. On November 11, 2005, he was pronounced dead. A moment that shattered the calm of their once peaceful community. The news rippled through Robinson like a shockwave. Keith was well-liked, respected, and known as a devoted father and husband. His passing transformed the family's story from one of ordinary challenges to a sudden, unimaginable tragedy. Almost immediately, investigators opened a homicide inquiry. Detectives focused first on the facts. The open door, the missing firearms, the timeline of the early morning call. And soon, attention naturally turned toward the only other adult known to be in the home that night, Darlene Gentry. She was brought in for questioning, not as an accused person, but as a crucial witness, the one who had found her husband and made the emergency call. During her interview, Darlene described the evening of November 8th as uneventful. She had gone out for dinner and drinks with a few close friends, something she said she rarely did. She returned home around 8:30 p.m., expecting a quiet night. But according to her account, Keith wasn't in a good mood. He had apparently discovered a restaurant receipt earlier in the day, a small thing, but one that triggered a familiar argument. To him, it was another example of unnecessary spending, especially now that money was tighter. What might have seemed trivial to outsiders had become a sensitive topic in their marriage. According to Darlene, their argument began like so many others, about finances, priorities, and the exhaustion that had quietly built up between them. Words were exchanged, voices rose, and frustration took hold. Feeling cornered and emotionally drained, Darlene later said she grabbed her car keys and left the house, needing space to calm down. She didn't go far, just drove aimlessly through the quiet Texas roads, letting the stillness of the night absorb her anger. For nearly an hour, she circled familiar streets, trying to make sense of how a simple disagreement had spiraled into hurt feelings. Eventually, when her emotions settled, she turned the car around and drove home. When she returned, the house was dark and still. According to her later statement, she apologized to Keith, wanting to move past the argument and start fresh the next day. Keith, she said, accepted her apology quietly, and the two retreated to separate corners of the house to unwind. Before long, he went to bed in the master bedroom. Darlene claimed she stayed awake for a while longer, watching a movie, and eventually dozed off in a recliner nearby. At approximately 5:15 a.m., Darlene said she woke briefly to the sound of their dog barking. It wasn't unusual. Their pet occasionally reacted to small noises outside or passing cars. Believing it was nothing, she drifted back to sleep. Around 6 a.m., she said she got up again, intending to start the morning routine. As she moved through the quiet house, she noticed the faint chill of dawn air coming from the back hallway. When she entered the master bedroom, she said she tried to wake Keith for work, but he didn't respond. It was then, Darlene claimed, that she saw something that froze her in place. The back door stood wide open. The gun cabinet, which had been locked the night before, appeared to have been tampered with, its contents gone. The scene, as she described it, felt surreal, as if an intruder had entered their home in the night, targeted Keith, and escaped with several firearms, leaving no trace of forced entry. It was a frightening picture. A quiet suburban home, a young family asleep inside, and a supposed break-in that had turned deadly. But as investigators began piecing together the evidence, that version of events soon started to unravel. Detectives on the scene noticed a number of small details that didn't fit the story Darlene had told. The timeline of events she described didn't match the physical evidence. Medical findings indicated that the incident had occurred significantly earlier than Darlene suggested, at a time when she claimed to have been awake, just a few rooms away. According to investigators, the circumstances would have made it nearly impossible to sleep through. More red flags emerged almost immediately. Although Darlene initially reported that several firearms were missing, officers found a number of those same weapons stacked neatly outside the back of the house. It didn't look like the handiwork of a panicked burglar fleeing the scene. Instead, it appeared as though someone had carefully arranged them, almost as if to create the impression of a robbery that hadn't actually occurred. Then came another troubling fact. Only 2 people had access to the locked gun cabinet: Keith and Darlene. The key was kept in a private location that outsiders wouldn't have known about. For detectives, that detail made the possibility of a random break-in seem increasingly unlikely. Whoever had opened the cabinet wasn't a stranger. They were someone familiar with the home, the family, and their habits. Investigators also examined Darlene's actions in the critical moments after her discovery. She was a registered nurse, trained to recognize medical distress, capable of performing CPR, and equipped to respond in an emergency. Yet when paramedics arrived, they noted that she hadn't performed any first aid. She hadn't even attempted to guide them to her husband or meet them outside. Instead, she remained in the house, calm but distant, as emergency responders rushed in to take control of the scene. And then, there was the 911 call itself. When investigators replayed the recording, they found it striking. Rather than the raw panic or confusion typical of someone calling about a life-threatening emergency, Darlene's voice was clear, measured, and deliberate. She gave a surprisingly detailed timeline, noting what time she'd gone to bed, when she woke up, and the order of her observations. Some detectives found her composure unusual. Others saw it as an attempt to control the narrative from the very beginning. Later that same morning, Darlene voluntarily came to the police station for a formal interview. Initially, she was cooperative, answering background questions about her marriage, family, and the events of the night before. But as the questions became more specific, especially regarding the timeline and the location of the firearms, her tone shifted. She hesitated, grew quiet, and eventually asked for an attorney. The moment she invoked her Fifth Amendment right, the interview came to an abrupt end. Despite her sudden silence, Darlene maintained her innocence. She insisted she had done nothing wrong and repeatedly stated that she loved her husband. She told friends and family that Keith had been her best friend, her partner, and the father of her children, and that the idea of anyone suspecting her was both insulting and devastating. When detectives revisited her statements, they found a recurring theme. Darlene admitted that the couple had been under stress, but she described their challenges as ordinary, the kind any family might face. Yes, money had been tight. Yes, they sometimes argued. But she claimed that their disagreements never crossed the line into anything serious or dangerous. Still, the inconsistencies in her story continued to raise questions. Evidence at the scene suggested something deeply personal, an act carried out not by an intruder, but by someone who knew exactly how the home operated, where valuables were kept, and when everyone would be asleep. As detectives dug deeper, new questions surfaced. Who had both the motive and the access? Could this really have been a random attack in a quiet Texas neighborhood, or was something far more deliberate hiding beneath the surface? Darlene's later statements were filled with emotion. At times, she cried, recalling how much Keith adored their 3 young sons. She said she still couldn't understand what had happened or why. To investigators, her tears seemed genuine, but they couldn't ignore the contradictions woven throughout her version of events. And while suspicion alone wasn't enough to take action, the physical evidence began to tell its own story. With Darlene's consent, detectives conducted a second, more thorough search of the Gentry home. They were expecting to find signs of forced entry, or perhaps clues that an intruder had passed through unnoticed. But the results only deepened the mystery. There were no broken locks, no footprints, and no forced doors. The house, in every way that mattered, appeared untouched. What they did find, however, would quietly shift the entire direction of the investigation. For a while, it seemed as though they might come up empty-handed. Then, deep inside the kitchen trash bin, something caught their attention. A small but suspicious bundle wrapped in paper towels. When officers carefully unwrapped it, they discovered a pair of latex gloves, slightly discolored, hidden beneath layers of discarded household waste. At first glance, the find seemed ordinary. After all, Darlene was a nurse, and gloves weren't unusual in her home. But once the gloves were examined in the lab, The truth they revealed changed the entire course of the case. Inside one of the gloves was a single, .22 caliber shell casing, faint traces of gunshot residue, and, most critically, DNA belonging only to two people, Keith and Darlene. It was the first tangible link connecting her to the act itself. Investigators immediately knew they had found a crucial piece of the puzzle. Then came a new discovery, not of evidence, but of motive. As detectives combed through the couple's financial records, they learned that Keith Gentry had a life insurance policy valued between $500,000 and $750,000. For a family that had been struggling under mounting financial pressure, that number stood out. It wasn't proof by itself, but it painted a picture that investigators could no longer ignore. 19 days after the incident, on November 28, 2005, authorities moved forward. Darlene Gentry was arrested and charged with murder. But her arrest was brief. That same day, Keith's parents, who had supported her unwaveringly since the tragedy, stepped in. They posted a $50,000 bond securing her release. To them, Darlene wasn't a suspect. She was family. She was the mother of their grandchildren, the woman their son had loved. Even in the face of mounting evidence, they couldn't reconcile the idea that she might have been involved. For a time, Darlene appeared calm, even optimistic. She continued to maintain her innocence, presenting herself as a grieving widow simply trying to hold her family together. But behind the scenes, investigators were quietly watching. And soon, Darlene's actions would provide them with something far more telling than words. Not long after her release on bail, Darlene reached out to an acquaintance, Robert Pavlovala, a local landowner. She expressed interest in purchasing a small, rural property near Axtell, Texas. The land featured open fields, a few trees, and a peaceful pond that shimmered under the afternoon sun. To Robert, the conversation seemed innocent enough. Darlene told him that the pond reminded her of Keith's love for fishing and that she hoped one day to take their 3 boys there to honor his memory. It sounded touching, even heartfelt. The image of a mother trying to create a place of remembrance for her children. But just a few weeks later, Robert received a second call from Darlene that struck him as odd. Her tone was different, urgent, but vague. She told him she no longer liked the pond and wanted it filled in completely. The sudden change made little sense. Why would someone want to destroy a feature she had once described as a tribute to her late husband? Pavlovala's instincts told him something wasn't right. After thinking it over, he decided to contact law enforcement. When detectives heard about the request, their curiosity turned to suspicion. If Darlene wanted the pond buried, perhaps there was a reason. Something hidden beneath the surface that she didn't want found. Within days, authorities organized a search of the property. The process was meticulous. Divers entered the murky water, moving slowly through the mud and reeds, combing every inch of the pond floor. And then, almost unbelievably, they found it. A .22 caliber revolver, coated with silt and algae, resting quietly at the bottom. Ballistic testing later confirmed what investigators feared. It matched the caliber of the shell casing found in the latex gloves. It was the weapon that had ended Keith's life. For detectives, the discovery was monumental, but they still needed one final piece. Something that would directly link Darlene to the act of concealment. Without that, the evidence, though damning, remained circumstantial. So, they devised a plan. They turned once more to Robert Pavlovala, asking him to play a role in what would become a carefully controlled sting operation. Pavlovala agreed. Following the investigators' guidance, he called Darlene and told her that before he could fill in the pond, he would need to drain the water completely. The goal was simple. If Darlene believed the pond was about to be emptied, she might return to retrieve whatever she had left behind. She didn't hesitate. Over the phone, Darlene remained composed, agreeing politely and without objection. But the next day, just as detectives had predicted, she arrived at the property. Surveillance cameras hidden nearby captured everything. Wearing wading boots and carrying a long metal rod, Darlene stepped into the shallow pond and began poking methodically at the muddy bottom. She moved slowly, focusing on the very same area where investigators had already retrieved the revolver. Her movements were deliberate, her expression calm. She appeared to be searching for something, perhaps unaware that every moment was being recorded by law enforcement. The footage would become one of the most powerful pieces of evidence in the entire case. It was quiet, unspoken proof, not of panic, but of intent. With that, investigators had what they needed: the gloves, the bullet casing, the gun, the insurance policy, and now the footage. All threads that, when woven together, told a story no one could ignore. In February 2007, more than a year after the events that shattered the Gentry family, Darlene Gentry, then 32 years old, stood trial in McLennan County, Texas. The courtroom was filled with reporters, family members, and community residents who had followed every development of the case. The trial lasted 5 tense days. The prosecution's case centered on the surveillance video. Darlene in the pond, probing the exact location where the weapon had been found. They argued that her actions were not those of a grieving widow, but of someone trying to erase the final piece of evidence. Combined with the forensic findings, the gloves in the trash, the staged burglary, and her inconsistent statements, the story became clear. The defense team took a different approach. They called no witnesses during the guilt-innocence phase, relying instead on cross-examinations and procedural challenges. They questioned the reliability of the timeline, the interpretation of the video, and the emotional assumptions being made by the prosecution. But in the end, the mountain of evidence was too high to climb. On February 8, 2007, after just a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned its decision: guilty of first-degree murder. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. The jurors had made their decision, and there was no mistaking the weight of it. Darlene Gentry was sentenced to 60 years in prison, a punishment that would define the rest of her life. For the prosecution, it marked the end of a long and painstaking journey toward justice. For the Gentry family, it marked the beginning of another, learning how to live with the loss of both Keith and the woman they had once welcomed as their own. During the sentencing phase, prosecutors laid out what they believed had driven Darlene's choices. Her motive, they said, was both emotional and financial, a mixture of resentment, pressure, and opportunity. She had wanted an escape from a marriage that, by many accounts, had grown strained under financial and emotional weight. And beyond that, she saw in Keith's life insurance policy the promise of stability and freedom. To the state, it was a cold calculation, the tragic end of a man's life reduced to numbers on a page. In their final address to the jury, prosecutors reminded everyone that appearances can be deceiving. When the sentence was handed down, Darlene showed little visible reaction. She remained composed, her expression unreadable. Friends who once defended her sat in quiet disbelief. Even members of Keith's family, still reeling from the layers of betrayal, struggled to reconcile the verdict with the woman they had once trusted so completely. Today, Darlene Gentry is serving her sentence at the Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas, a facility that houses female offenders from across the state. There, her life follows a routine far removed from the world she once knew. Days measured by schedules, regulations, and quiet reflection. Over the years, she has continued to maintain her innocence, repeating that she loved Keith and would never harm him. In November 2017, she sought to challenge her conviction, filing a motion for a new trial. But the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied the request, leaving her original sentence firmly in place. On the 8th of May 2005, a group of walkers in Limefield Woods came across what appeared to be a discarded bundle at the edge of a clearing. The authorities were quickly summoned, and the scene was cordoned off. Investigators would later describe the initial discovery as shocking not only for the family, but for the officers themselves. Emma's body was naked, suggesting a deliberate attempt to humiliate or erase identity, and a ligature was found around her neck, consistent with strangulation. The circumstances left little doubt. Emma Caldwell had been murdered. Emma Caldwell was born in 1977 in Erskine, a small suburb of Glasgow, Scotland. She was the daughter of Margaret and William Caldwell, who described her as intelligent, curious, and emotionally sensitive. Her father, Jonathan Caldwell, worked as a mid-level manager for a regional insurance company, a man who prided himself on his meticulous attention to spreadsheets, accounts, and decorum. Her mother, Mary Ann Caldwell, stayed at home for much of Emma's early childhood. Emma was the eldest of 3 siblings. Her family was close-knit and supportive, prioritizing the upbringing and education of their children despite the everyday challenges of life at the time. Emma's parents aimed to provide a safe and nurturing environment, encouraging her interest in learning, reading, and engaging with others. Emma attended her local school, where she demonstrated abilities in languages and the humanities. Teachers noted her diligence, responsibility, and friendly nature. She easily connected with her peers and earned respect due to her honesty and attentive nature. During her school years, Emma showed interest in art and literature, enjoyed reading, discussing current events, and assisting classmates with their studies. At the same time, she was shy and sensitive, often feeling deeply about failures or conflicts, yet she consistently maintained a sense of fairness and a desire to help others. Friends remember Emma as a person with a gentle character and strong empathy. She had a talent for noticing small details and supporting people during difficult moments, often serving as a quiet advisor for those in need. Her sense of humor was subtle and intelligent. She could make friends laugh with a lighthearted joke, without ever using humor to hurt anyone. Emma was a loyal and reliable friend, always ready to help, even if it required personal effort or time. Her character was marked by a combination of inner strength and vulnerability. On one hand, she was capable of independence, making decisions, and standing up for her beliefs. On the other hand, she remained sensitive to the opinions of others and valued the support of those close to her. She appreciated honesty and openness in relationships, preferred to avoid conflict, and sought peaceful resolutions when possible. This balance of gentleness and inner resolve made her personality complex and compelling, inspiring trust and affection from those who knew her. During her youth, Emma was active in school activities and social circles. She enjoyed walks in nature, music, and deep conversations about life, always showing genuine interest in the people around her. Even during challenging periods, she retained the ability to find joy in simple things, whether it was spending time with friends, reading a book, or enjoying family moments. Her parents and friends noted that she consistently sought harmony, valuing trust, honesty, and mutual support. Emma Caldwell was, at heart, a deeply human individual, intelligent, attentive, and caring. The teenage years, however, brought their own challenges. Emma, like many adolescents, grappled with the search for identity, for meaning, and for independence. Yet, for her, these questions were often intensified by a sense of heightened responsibility toward her family. Her younger siblings looked to her as a role model, and Emma took this responsibility seriously, often prioritizing their needs over her own. This sense of duty was compounded by her observations of her parents' anxieties and occasional conflicts. Emma became a keen reader of emotions, learning to navigate tensions with tact and diplomacy, a skill that would later become essential in both her personal and professional life. In parallel with her emotional and intellectual development, Emma cultivated an array of interests and skills that suggested a future marked by versatility and ambition. University life provided Emma with a sense of autonomy and freedom, yet she approached it with the same measured diligence that had characterized her adolescence. She excelled academically, balancing demanding coursework with extracurricular activities such as volunteer programs, mentoring initiatives, and research projects. Professors and classmates alike noted her combination of intelligence, curiosity, and disciplined work ethic, qualities that distinguished her as someone likely to achieve significant professional success. Yet even as Emma appeared to thrive, there were subtle signs that she was quietly grappling with deeper issues. She was not unhappy in the conventional sense, but her early maturity and self-awareness often set her apart from peers, creating an inner world rich with reflection but occasionally tinged with anxiety. Upon graduation, Emma moved into the professional world, securing positions that allowed her to apply her analytical and interpersonal skills. She gravitated toward roles in corporate strategy and organizational analysis, environments where intelligence, discretion, and the ability to read people were highly valued. Colleagues admired her professionalism and dedication, but Emma maintained her characteristic distance, ensuring that while she was respected, she remained difficult to categorize entirely. Outside of work, she continued her intellectual pursuits, attended lectures, and cultivated a network of friends who shared her interests in psychology, literature, and cultural affairs. However, the tragic loss of the older sister from cancer in 1998 brought Emma to deep depression, and she began to battle addiction, first to alcohol and later to forbidden substances. Her descent into dependency was gradual but devastating. Like many who fell into addiction in Glasgow during that period, she found herself caught between cycles of temporary recovery and relapse, with limited access to consistent support. As her addiction deepened, Emma drifted away from the life she had once known. She lost jobs and strained family relationships, though her parents, Margaret and William Caldwell, never stopped trying to reach her. They visited her often, encouraged her to seek treatment, and remained hopeful that she would find her way back. Her mother in particular maintained regular contact, describing Emma as a loving girl who had simply lost her way. By her mid-20s, Emma was living a transient life in Glasgow's city centre, where she became loved for money to support her addiction. Like many women in similar circumstances, she operated mainly in the city's red light districts, often late at night. Friends from that period recalled that she was wary but polite, quiet but dependable. She wasn't confrontational. She just wanted to earn enough for the next day, the next dose, the next bit of stability that always felt out of reach. Social workers and outreach volunteers who met her during this time described her as gentle and trusting, with a sense of humor that surfaced even on difficult nights. She sometimes spoke about wanting to get clean, about wanting to return to her family and live a normal life again. There were attempts at rehabilitation, moments of progress, and genuine efforts to change. But like so many others battling long-term addiction, Emma's circumstances, poverty, dependency, trauma, and limited resources, made recovery painfully fragile. The women who worked the streets formed their own quiet networks of care and protection, often sharing information about dangerous clients or police patrols. It was a world that existed at the edge of public awareness, visible but rarely seen with empathy. Emma lived within that world, adapting as best she could. Despite the chaos surrounding her, Emma remained close to her family. She often visited her parents in Erskine, sometimes staying a few days to recover from the physical toll of her addiction. Her mother recalled her as a girl who never stopped being loving, even when she was at her lowest. Those visits offered glimpses of the person Emma once was, affectionate, funny, and reflective. Her family hoped that one day she would return home for good. In early 2005, Emma was 27 years old. She was trying to manage her addiction and had recently left a rehabilitation program. Though her future was uncertain, there were still moments of hope. She kept in touch with support workers, made tentative plans to stabilize her life, and spoke about wanting a fresh start. But that year would instead become the last chapter of her life. April 4th began like many other days. Emma had been in touch with her mother earlier that week. She spoke warmly but briefly, reassuring her that things were okay. It was the kind of conversation that families often have when there's more beneath the surface, when love is mixed with worry and trust has been tested by time. Emma's mother hung up believing that her daughter was safe, unaware that it would be one of the last times she would ever hear her voice. Emma was last seen in early April, reportedly leaving her temporary accommodation in Glasgow for what friends and family assumed would be a night of work on the city's streets. She appeared calm and composed, dressed modestly and carrying a small handbag. A few people recognized her. She wasn't in distress, and nothing seemed unusual. Around 11 p.m., a witness remembered seeing her speaking with a man near a parked car, a detail that would only become significant much later. That night passed, and by morning, Emma was nowhere to be found. At first, no alarm was raised. It wasn't unusual for her to go silent for a day or two. Friends assumed she might be staying with someone or simply taking time alone. But when days turned into a week, concern deepened. Her mother tried to call but received no answer. Emma's family contacted the police and reported her missing. Initially, her disappearance was categorized as high risk due to her involvement in sex work and history of substance dependency. But the reality of the situation would prove far grimmer than anyone imagined. For the officers handling it, there was little immediate indication of foul play. Adults went missing often in a big city, some by choice, others because of circumstances beyond their control. But Margaret Caldwell, Emma's mother, knew instinctively that something was wrong. Her daughter, despite her struggles, was always in touch. She called home regularly, sometimes just to say hello. Silence was not normal. As the days turned into weeks, the search widened. Police spoke with Emma's friends, her partner, and others in the Govan Hill area. Posters with her photograph began to appear on lampposts and community boards. Her face, soft features, light brown hair, and kind eyes, looked out from the paper with an expression that seemed to ask for help. Local media began covering the story, highlighting the family's growing fear and their appeals for information. It would be more than a month before there was a breakthrough. On the 8th of May 2005, a group of walkers in Limefield Woods came across what appeared to be a discarded bundle at the edge of a clearing. The authorities were quickly summoned, and the scene was cordoned off. Investigators would later describe the initial discovery as shocking not only for the family but for the officers themselves. Emma's body was naked, suggesting a deliberate attempt to humiliate or erase identity, and a ligature was found around her neck, consistent with strangulation. The circumstances left little doubt. Emma Caldwell had been murdered. The discovery raised immediate questions. How had she come to be in such a secluded location? Who had access to her during her final hours? And why had there been such a delay in tracing her movements? For the family, there was an incomprehensible grief layered with uncertainty. Her mother recalled the moment she was informed. It felt unreal. We had hoped she was alive, that she had simply disappeared somewhere to escape her struggles. But hearing it confirmed, it was the worst possible news. For the local community and law enforcement, it marked the beginning of a complex investigation into both a brutal crime and a system that had allowed her to remain vulnerable. From the earliest moments, investigators faced practical challenges. The location of the body, a forested, relatively isolated area, suggested premeditation. Emma's movements in the days leading up to her death were partially documented through the limited network of social workers, acquaintances, and other sex workers who knew her routines. Evidence collected at temporary accommodations in Glasgow, combined with witness accounts, helped establish a timeline that narrowed the window of her disappearance. Yet even with these leads, the case remained opaque. From the beginning, detectives faced a challenge. The area where Emma had been found, Limefield Woods, near the town of Biggar in South Lanarkshire, was remote and difficult to access. The crime scene itself was meticulously processed. Forensic teams documented the placement of the body, collected trace evidence, and conducted a thorough search for any signs that could indicate a struggle or a perpetrator's identity. It quickly became evident that the murder had been committed by someone with knowledge of the area and an understanding of how to avoid immediate detection. Investigators quickly established that she had not reached the site on her own. Someone had taken her there. The surrounding landscape was quiet and rural, far from the busy streets of Glasgow where she was last seen. For detectives, that detail alone suggested planning and purpose. Investigators later reflected on how this combination of environmental familiarity and premeditation complicated the investigation from the start. The woods, often used by walkers and locals, became a critical site of inquiry, and officers mapped every access point and possible route to understand how Emma had arrived there. As the news broke, the public reacted with shock and sorrow. Emma Caldwell's name quickly became synonymous with a growing awareness of the dangers faced by vulnerable women in urban areas. Local newspapers covered the story extensively but respectfully, focusing on Emma's life and the desperate efforts of her family rather than sensational details. Community members in Govan Hill organized vigils, lighting candles in her memory and calling for justice. The investigation, led by Strathclyde Police, began methodically. Officers mapped Emma's final known movements, interviewing witnesses in the city center and those who lived near the woodland area. Forensic teams examined the site, collecting soil samples, fibers, and trace materials. A long list of potential suspects was compiled, most of them men known to frequent the same neighborhoods where Emma had lived and worked. It was an enormous undertaking, but from the very beginning, a single theory began to dominate the inquiry. The police investigation initially centered on a group of men who frequented the same areas as Emma. That connection, though tenuous, became the central thread of the investigation. Detectives traced phone records, vehicle movements, and witness accounts, all in an effort to build a case. The problem was that the evidence didn't quite fit. The timeline was uncertain, the phone data inconclusive. There were inconsistencies in witness statements, some based on vague recollections made under stress. But rather than broadening the scope of inquiry, investigators narrowed their focus, convinced they were on the right path. It was what some later described as a case of tunnel vision, a determination to make the facts fit the theory rather than the other way around. Several individuals were questioned, and 4 men of Turkish descent were eventually detained for interrogation. Authorities believed they had found a connection, a series of phone calls and movements that placed these men near Emma's last known location. But the case against them soon began to unravel. The evidence was circumstantial, the witness statements inconsistent. Despite weeks of questioning, no conclusive link could be established. Eventually, the Crown Office determined there was insufficient evidence to proceed. The men were released without charge. That decision would later prove to be one of the most consequential missteps in modern Scottish policing. By focusing narrowly on a single theory, investigators had overlooked other possibilities. They had missed a name that, at the time, appeared in their own notes, someone who had been mentioned by several women during earlier interviews. His name was Ian Packer. Ian Packer, a delivery driver in his early 40s with a known history of troubling behavior toward women. Several sex workers in the area had described encounters with a man matching his description, often mentioning that he drove a silver car and had a habit of offering them rides. Some had filed complaints, describing him as intimidating and persistent. In one report, a woman even mentioned that he claimed to know Emma Caldwell. But that information never gained traction. Investigators, focused on their primary suspects, dismissed it as irrelevant. Packer remained a background figure, someone noted but not pursued. The official investigation slowed. Detectives reviewed files periodically, but without new evidence, little could be done. For years, the case remained open but inactive. Media coverage dwindled, and the story slipped from the headlines. Yet Margaret and William Caldwell refused to give up. They continued to meet with police, to write letters, and to ask for updates. Their determination kept Emma's name alive in the public conversation, even when official efforts had stalled. Behind the scenes, there were growing concerns about how the case had been handled. Some officers within Strathclyde Police quietly questioned the direction of the inquiry. The emphasis on the initial suspects had consumed enormous resources while overlooking other credible leads. In time, these concerns would become central to one of Scotland's most significant policing scandals. Police also considered the social context of her death. Emma was one of many women operating in the city's sex trade, a community that historically had been underrepresented and overlooked in police investigations. Early in the inquiry, authorities recognized that many of the women who might have had relevant information were themselves reluctant to come forward due to fear of reprisals or legal consequences. This reticence would delay the gathering of crucial testimony and contribute to a slow initial investigation. Nevertheless, officers worked to establish contact with witnesses, using outreach programs, local charities, and social services to build a clearer picture of Emma's last days. The discovery of Emma's body also drew media attention, though initial reports were cautious in tone. National outlets reported her disappearance and subsequent death, highlighting her age, the location of the discovery, and her involvement in the sex trade. Local newspapers emphasized the tragedy of her loss and the need for law enforcement to act swiftly. Amid this coverage, there emerged a wider conversation about the risks faced by vulnerable women in Glasgow. A discussion that would continue for nearly 2 decades, as subsequent developments in the case revealed systemic failures and prolonged the path to justice. For the family, each development was both painful and incompletely informative. They attended briefings with police who explained procedural steps and watched as forensic teams continued to analyze the scene. The emotional toll was immense. The public documentation of her death, the reminders of her absence, and the painstakingly slow accumulation of evidence all compounded their grief. Those close to Emma recall the tension between hope and despair in those weeks. The hope that perhaps something had been missed, the despair at each new indication that she had been murdered. At the same time, investigators were working behind the scenes to establish suspects. Patterns of movement, past reports of harassment, and previous complaints lodged with social services formed an initial investigative framework. While the murder itself had the hallmarks of a deliberate, targeted act, it also intersected with broader challenges in policing marginalized communities. Many officers involved later acknowledged the difficulty of navigating these parallel issues. On one hand, pursuing leads rigorously. On the other, engaging with a community historically wary of law enforcement. By the end of May 2005, weeks after the discovery, the case had gained the attention of senior investigative teams. The murder was classified as high priority, with dedicated detectives assigned to follow up on all potential leads. The investigation changed hands multiple times as officers retired, transferred, or were reassigned. Each new team revisited the same files, often reaching the same dead ends. But the story never completely disappeared from the public consciousness. Every so often, new leads surfaced, most of them false, some promising, all eventually inconclusive. A decade passed. Technology advanced, forensics evolved, and social attitudes toward crimes against women began to shift. By 2015, renewed public interest in the case was sparked by investigative journalists who began looking into the unsolved murder. BBC Scotland, among others, published reports questioning why police had failed to pursue other suspects, particularly one individual. Again, the name that had appeared in early files. Ian Packer. The revelations reignited public outrage. Victim advocacy groups demanded a new investigation, and the Scottish Parliament received petitions calling for accountability. Under mounting pressure, Police Scotland, by then a unified national force, announced a full review of the case. A new team of detectives was assigned, independent from those who had led the original inquiry. Their mission: re-examine every piece of evidence from the ground up. What they found was deeply troubling. The early investigation had not only overlooked key witnesses, but it also failed to connect multiple reports from women who described threatening behavior by the same man. Several of these incidents occurred both before and after Emma's death, suggesting an ongoing pattern. The new team tracked down those witnesses, some of whom had never been properly interviewed. Their stories painted a chillingly consistent portrait. A man who cruised through Glasgow at night, targeting vulnerable women, offering them rides and driving them to remote locations. The more investigators learned, the clearer the picture became. Many of the women identified Packer's car and described specific details that matched his behavior patterns. Some had even provided vehicle registration numbers to police years earlier. In at least one instance, an officer had documented the information in a report, but the file had been marked no further action. In 2019, with support from forensic experts, the new investigative team revisited the physical evidence collected in 2005. Advances in technology allowed them to re-examine items that had previously yielded no results. It's possible that Emma, trusting that she knew him, accepted a ride. She may have believed it was just another encounter, one that would end like countless others, with her returning safely home. But that night, something went terribly wrong. What exactly transpired remains partly unknown, shaped by evidence and inference rather than eyewitness testimony. What is known is that Emma Caldwell never made it back to Glasgow. Instead, her life ended far from the city, in the quiet seclusion of Limefield Woods. They found trace material that could now be analyzed with modern DNA methods. It wasn't a single breakthrough, but a series of small confirmations, pieces of a puzzle that began to fit together after years of being overlooked. Gradually, a timeline of Packer's activities emerged. He had lived and worked in the Glasgow area for years, driving routes that frequently took him through neighborhoods known for prostitution. Multiple women came forward describing encounters that mirrored the patterns seen in Emma's case. Some of them had reported assaults and threats, but their claims had not been fully investigated at the time. When police reviewed these old statements alongside the new forensic findings, the parallels were undeniable. In 2021, detectives finally approached the Crown Office with their findings. After careful review, prosecutors authorized an arrest. In February 2022, Nearly 17 years after Emma Caldwell's death, Ian Packer was taken into custody. For the Caldwell family, the news brought both relief and sorrow. Relief that someone was finally being held accountable, and sorrow that it had taken so long. Margaret Caldwell, who had spent nearly 2 decades fighting for her daughter's case to be reopened, described the moment simply, "We've waited half a lifetime for this." The new investigation also uncovered internal failings within the police force. Reports surfaced that several officers had, in the early days of the inquiry, been aware of Packer's behavior but had chosen not to prioritize it. There were allegations of bias, procedural shortcuts, and poor record-keeping. These revelations prompted official apologies and calls for an independent inquiry into the handling of Emma's case. As Packer awaited trial, the scope of his alleged offenses expanded. Detectives uncovered evidence linking him to dozens of other attacks spanning more than a decade. What began as an investigation into one woman's death had exposed a pattern of predation that had gone unchecked for years. Many of his victims, like Emma, had been women living on the margins, individuals whose voices were too often ignored or dismissed. By 2023, as preparations for trial began, Emma Caldwell's case had become emblematic of something larger: the need for justice systems to listen, to investigate thoroughly, and to protect those most vulnerable. It was no longer just the story of one woman's murder, but a reflection of institutional failure and eventual accountability. Still, amid all the systemic analysis and legal complexity, the heart of the story remained simple: a family's enduring love and persistence. Margaret and William Caldwell attended every briefing, read every report, and continued to speak publicly about Emma, not as a symbol or statistic, but as their daughter. They spoke of her warmth, her laughter, her compassion. They made sure that even as the case became a matter of national debate, people would remember Emma as a person, not just a victim. In late 2023, the Crown confirmed that Packer would stand trial for Emma Caldwell's murder, as well as a long list of related offenses. The announcement marked the culmination of nearly 2 decades of work, grief, and perseverance. For investigators, it was both a professional and moral reckoning. For Emma's family, it was a long-awaited step toward closure. The investigation into Emma Caldwell's death revealed 2 truths: that justice, even when delayed, can still be achieved, and that the pursuit of it often depends not on institutions alone, but on the persistence of those who refuse to let the truth be buried. Her case became a catalyst for reform within Police Scotland, leading to renewed scrutiny of how crimes against women are handled and how vulnerable individuals are protected. In the end, the investigation was not just about solving a crime, it was about correcting years of silence, neglect, and error. It was about restoring a voice that had been lost and ensuring that Emma Caldwell's story would stand as both a warning and a promise. That no matter how long it takes, truth has a way of resurfacing. By the time the trial of Ian Packer began in January 2024, more than 18 years had passed since Emma Caldwell's disappearance and death. For Emma's family, the courtroom was a place of both immense hope and deep anxiety. Would the evidence built over nearly 2 decades be enough? Could a jury now, after so much time, be persuaded of the narrative pieced together by new investigators, forensic scientists, and testimonies from survivors who had spoken out? From the outset, the trial was closely watched by the media, advocacy groups, and members of the public. The case symbolized much more than a single murder. It represented institutional accountability, the voices of marginalized women, and the difficult interplay of memory, evidence, and justice over time. The courtroom, though ordinary in form, judge, jury, gallery, felt weighted with history. The prosecution's case was carefully structured. Its core argument was that Packer had methodically selected and targeted Emma Caldwell, as he had many other women, and that his behavior represented a pattern of predation extending beyond a single incident. The evidence presented included forensic reanalysis of materials recovered from the woods, DNA traces linked to Packer's confirmed samples, patterns of his vehicle movements over the years, and the testimonies of multiple women who had encountered him before and after 2005. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Some were survivors who described disturbing interactions with Packer. Late-night rides offered and accepted, conversations that turned uncomfortable, or requests that a woman exit a vehicle in a secluded area. Though none of those encounters ended in murder, their significance lay in their consistency. The repeated behaviors, the methodical approach, the pattern. These testimonies, delivered with courage and composure, painted a fuller portrait of the man the defense tried to portray as a benign figure. Another key group of witnesses comprised forensic experts and cold case investigators. They explained the significance of trace evidence, fibers, soil, and minute DNA fragments, and how, thanks to advances in laboratory methods, materials once considered inconclusive had become meaningful. They walked the jury through the chain of custody of evidence, from the initial collection in 2005 to the modern reanalysis. They discussed how the newer technology ruled out many alternative suspects while strengthening the link to Packer. Though technical, their explanations were delivered in clear language, ensuring the jury could follow both the science and its legal implication. Emma's mother, Margaret, also took the stand. Her testimony was emotionally composed and restrained, yet deeply impactful. She described her relationship with Emma, their conversations about recovery, and the hopes she held for her daughter's future. She also spoke of the years of waiting, the repeated pleas to the police for re-examination, and the sense that justice had been delayed but not denied. Her presence in court was not one of victimization, but of dignified insistence that Emma be heard again. The defense, in contrast, focused on casting doubt, exploring gaps, inconsistencies, and the challenges inherent in revisiting evidence after so much time. They challenged the forensic methodology, suggested alternate interpretations of witness statements, and emphasized that memory degrades with time. They argued that the pattern of alleged prior offenses was circumstantial, not definitive proof of guilt in Emma's case. Cross-examinations probed for discrepancies in statements and motivations of witnesses. It was a tense dance, prosecution trying to tie pieces together, defense seeking to unravel them. A pivotal moment came when the prosecution presented a reconstructed timeline of Packer's movements around early April 2005. Using digital data, vehicle logs, and witness observations, they laid out a sequence that placed him in proximity to both Emma's last known location and the route toward the location where her body was found. This mapping of spatial and temporal movement resonated powerfully in the courtroom. It bridged the distance between the city and the woods, between the known and the unknown. Yet even compelling evidence required human narrative. The jury had to make sense not only of technical testimony, but of motive, intent, and character. Was it enough to demonstrate a pattern of behavior? Could they be convinced beyond reasonable doubt that Packer alone was responsible for Emma's death, rather than someone else entirely? These were not questions of science. They were questions of judgment. As closing arguments commenced, the prosecution reiterated how Emma had been failed by early investigative choices, but that years of vigilance and modern techniques had now given her a second chance for justice. They asked the jury to reconcile the pattern of prior threats, the re-examined evidence, and the consistency of witness accounts. The defense urged caution, reminding jurors that gaps remained, alternative explanations had not been entirely ruled out, and that the passage of time complicated certainty. Beyond the courtroom, the trial prompted reflection across Scotland and beyond. Questions were asked about how early investigative decisions had delayed accountability, how vulnerable women are protected, or not, and how legal systems must continually adapt to the demands of cases that evolve over years. A government commission was launched to review the handling of the case, focusing especially on the earlier years when critical leads were overlooked and evidence mishandled. After deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. On February 28, 2024, Ian Packer was found guilty of Emma Caldwell's murder, and also guilty of multiple related offenses against other women, spanning more than a decade. The verdict was met with relief and sorrow. Relief that a perpetrator had been held accountable. Sorrow that the awaited justice had taken so long. During sentencing, the court imposed a minimum term of 36 years imprisonment before possible release, along with strict post-release restrictions and extended supervision. The sentence was noted in legal circles as one of the harshest in Scottish history for a single individual, reflecting the seriousness of not only the act of violence, but the broader pattern of predation and prolonged suffering. Using ground-penetrating radar, investigators detected irregularities beneath the surface, signs that the ground had been disturbed. On August 16, 2020, an excavation team began to dig at the identified site. The work was carried out meticulously and by hand, layer by layer, to avoid damaging any potential evidence. After about an hour and a half, the team uncovered human DNA. Alongside the DNA, they found fragments of clothing and other materials that could preserve DNA samples for later analysis. That was the moment when the investigators realized they had found Christy Wilson. Nearby, detectives discovered the same jewelry Christy had been wearing on the night she disappeared, a delicate bracelet and a pair of earrings. These items provided an immediate visual confirmation of her identity, even before laboratory tests were completed. The forensic examination that followed was extensive and methodical, lasting several weeks. Specialists conducted DNA tests, analyzed trace evidence, and documented every item recovered from the site to reconstruct the circumstances surrounding Christy Wilson's death. Every crime has its own story, and we're here to tell it to you, our dear viewers. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay with us. In the heart of Silicon Valley, a place where innovation hums in the air, where glass towers mirror the California sun, and where dreams often come wrapped in the glow of computer screens, a girl named Christy Lynn Wilson came into the world. She was born on October 1st, 1977, in San Jose, California, a city known not only for its technology giants, but also for its neighborhoods filled with families striving for simple, honest lives. Christy was raised in a family that believed deeply in values that outlast any trend: honesty, perseverance, and compassion. Her parents, Debbie Boyd and Michael Wilson, were people who worked hard and tried to do what was right, even when life made that difficult. They gave Christy more than comfort and security. They gave her the invisible tools that shape a person's character. From them, she learned that strength could be quiet, and that success wasn't only measured in titles or money, but in how you treated others and stood by your word. Though her parents eventually went their separate ways, Christy never saw herself as a child divided between two homes. Instead, she built a bridge of love and respect that kept her close to both her mother and father. Each taught her something different. Her mother showed her the power of empathy and patience, while her father encouraged independence and confidence. These lessons would later form the steady core of who Christy became. From an early age, those around Christy noticed her spark. She wasn't just intelligent, she was curious in the truest sense. The kind of child who would ask why until she found an answer that felt right. Teachers remembered her bright mind and her ability to lead without needing to command. She could motivate her classmates with a smile rather than an argument. Even in her teenage years, when many drifted into cliques and conflicts, Christy carried a calm balance, firm in her beliefs yet open-hearted to those around her. Her friends would later recall how she always noticed the quiet ones, the people who seemed left out. Christy would walk up, start a conversation, and within minutes make them feel like they belonged. That was her quiet magic. The ability to turn strangers into friends and moments into memories. After graduating from high school, Christy knew that staying still wasn't in her nature. She had a hunger to grow, to learn, to see more of the world beyond her familiar streets. She enrolled at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, choosing to study communications, a field that perfectly reflected her gift for understanding people and connecting ideas. At Cal Poly, Christy thrived. She wasn't just another student chasing grades. She was someone who wanted to understand how words could shape actions and how empathy could bridge differences. Professors admired her insight and her discipline, while classmates remembered her humor and her willingness to help anyone who struggled. She volunteered for local community projects, organized charity events, and often stayed late to make sure things were done right. To support herself, she took part-time jobs and volunteer positions that gave her real-world experience. Whether she was helping organize a local event or tutoring younger students, Christy always gave her best. She believed that purpose was found not in what you earned, but in what you gave back. After earning her degree, she returned to Northern California, ready to build her career in the fast-paced world of business and technology. Christy joined Adobe Systems, one of Silicon Valley's most respected companies, and later worked for other leading firms in the region's ever-evolving tech landscape. Her colleagues saw her as dependable, intelligent, and fair, someone who could stay composed under pressure and bring out the best in a team. Despite her demanding work, Christy never let her professional life consume her spirit. She was passionate about running, yoga, and reading, especially literature that explored philosophy, human behavior, and the deeper meaning of life. Friends loved how she could jump from discussing Socrates to quoting lines from her favorite sitcoms, laughing in the same breath. She believed in balance between career and rest, ambition and gratitude, seriousness and laughter. Christy knew how to slow down, how to enjoy a cup of coffee by a window on a rainy morning, or how to spend an evening talking with friends about the future. And yes, there was love in her life. A quiet, genuine kind of love that didn't need grand gestures to be real. Christy was in a committed relationship with Danny, a kind and thoughtful young man who shared her values and her dreams. Together, they spoke about the future, about moving to a new city, growing in their careers, maybe starting a family one day. Those close to them described their bond as gentle and steady, a partnership built on respect and mutual care. Yet, as in every real life, there were moments of challenge too. Losing her job was a serious blow for Christy Wilson. For someone as dedicated and capable as she was, unemployment felt like a sudden pause in a life that had always been moving forward. Yet Christy was not the kind of person to surrender to despair. She allowed herself a brief moment to feel the weight of the setback. Then, true to her nature, she began planning her next steps. Instead of closing herself off, Christy turned her energy toward rebuilding. She polished her resume, reached out to former colleagues, and began sending applications to companies that matched her skill and ambition. It was during this time that she received an invitation to interview for a promising new position in San Francisco, an opportunity that could mark the beginning of a fresh chapter. Friends later recalled how optimistic she sounded in those days. Even while facing uncertainty, Christy remained steady and hopeful. She often told people, "Every ending has its reason, and maybe this one is making space for something better." Her words weren't just optimism. They reflected the quiet resilience that had guided her since childhood. That strength was something she inherited from her mother, Debbie Boyd, a woman who had weathered her own storms in life with remarkable grace. Debbie had always taught her daughter that self-belief was not arrogance but survival, that no matter what happened, you had to trust your ability to rise again. Christy absorbed that lesson deeply, carrying it into every decision she made. Family remained the cornerstone of Christy's world. No matter how busy her life became, she always found time to call her mother. Their conversations were warm and frequent, sometimes stretching late into the night. They talked about everything: the small victories of the day, worries that came and went, dreams for the future. Debbie knew every detail of her daughter's plans and felt proud of how grounded and kind Christy had remained despite the challenges of adulthood. Those who knew Christy personally described her as someone who gave more than she took. She was sincere, approachable, and deeply empathetic. Whether it was a friend going through heartbreak or a coworker under pressure, Christy always found time to listen and to comfort. She believed that kindness was not a weakness, but a quiet kind of courage. Her colleagues from previous jobs spoke about her in glowing terms. They remembered her calm energy, not the loud confidence of someone trying to stand out, but the quiet assurance of someone who simply knew things would be okay if everyone worked together. When Christy was in the room, one coworker said, the stress level just went down. You could feel it. She had a talent for finding common ground, for keeping people focused and motivated even in difficult moments. In the weeks before her interview, Christy had been organizing her schedule carefully. She had reviewed the company background, updated her portfolio, and prepared thoughtful answers to potential questions. She wanted to make a strong impression, not just as a professional, but as someone whose integrity could be felt even before it was spoken. By early October of 2005, things seemed to be slowly aligning again. The date for her interview was set. October 5th, in downtown San Francisco. The night before, she decided to give herself a small reward. A short break to ease her nerves before the big day. It wasn't a grand plan, just a few hours to breathe, to step away from the tension that had built up after weeks of job searching. Christy chose to visit Thunder Valley Casino, a popular entertainment destination located near Lincoln in Placer County. The decision was spontaneous, the kind of choice one makes when the air feels heavy and you just need to exhale. For Christy, it wasn't about risk or indulgence. It was about clearing her mind, letting go of worry, and reminding herself that joy still had a place in her life. She planned to spend only a couple of hours there, just enough time to play a few rounds of blackjack, sip a glass of wine, and enjoy the easy hum of conversation and music that filled the casino floor. It was, in her eyes, not an escape, but a pause. A small ritual of relaxation before the next important step. That Tuesday, October 4th, 2005, began like any other day. The sky over San Jose was bright and mild, the kind of early autumn day that hinted at change but still held onto the warmth of summer. Christy woke up early, answered a few messages, and spoke with her mother about the upcoming interview. Debbie later recalled that her daughter sounded calm, even excited, confident that good things were on the horizon. As evening approached, Christy got ready to head out. Around 6 p.m., she left her home in San Jose, planning to make the drive northeast toward Thunder Valley. She was driving alone in her car, dressed tastefully, as always. Jeans and a black top, not flashy, but elegant. Her car, clean, well-kept, and neatly organized, reflected her personality. Calm, composed, and self-reliant. Her phone rested on the seat beside her, connected to the charger, softly playing a playlist of her favorite songs. A mix of acoustic ballads and light pop that kept her company on the familiar drive through the California night. The glowing dashboard lights painted her face in a calm blue tone as she headed north toward Placer County. At approximately 8 p.m., the security cameras at Thunder Valley Casino captured Christy stepping through the entrance. The footage shows a woman at ease, smiling politely at the staff members who recognized her from previous visits. She wasn't a frequent gambler, but she occasionally stopped by after long weeks to unwind, to breathe in the chatter and rhythm of the gaming floor. The casino that night buzzed with its usual symphony. The muted shuffle of cards, the distant ring of slot machines, laughter drifting through the air. Christy walked calmly toward the blackjack tables, her stride unhurried. She took a seat, exchanged a few friendly words with the dealer, and began to play. For the next several hours, she seemed entirely herself, chatting, smiling, and enjoying the social atmosphere. The cameras showed nothing unusual, no sign of unease or distraction. She ordered a drink, clinked glasses with another player, and played with focus but good humor. To those nearby, she was just another patron enjoying her evening. As the clock approached midnight, the energy in the room began to shift. Some guests left, others lingered. Christy, appearing relaxed yet slightly tired, seemed to be preparing to wrap up her night. It was around this time that a man approached the table next to hers, someone the staff didn't recall seeing before. He struck up a light conversation, starting with a casual joke, the kind people exchange in passing moments. Cameras recorded their brief interaction. They talked, they smiled. To an observer, it looked friendly, even ordinary. He placed a few bets. She laughed at one of his remarks, and they exchanged small gestures of camaraderie. Nothing in the scene suggested conflict or tension. The staff, accustomed to the constant flow of visitors, paid little attention. As time passed, their interaction became a little more familiar. The footage showed them leaving the gaming room side by side, heading toward the exit area where the night air would feel cooler after hours indoors. At 1:13 a.m., the cameras captured the final image of Christy Wilson walking out of the casino doors with the man beside her. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. What followed in the hours after was pieced together later from limited data. A handful of digital traces, memories, and the timeline reconstructed by investigators. But at that moment, no one inside the casino had any reason to think that something was wrong. For the staff, it was just another routine night, one among many. When morning came, however, the ordinary rhythm of life began to fracture. Christy's boyfriend, Danny, awoke around 7 a.m. to a quiet apartment. Too quiet. He noticed immediately that Christy hadn't returned home. Her side of the bed was untouched, her car keys weren't in their usual place, and there were no missed calls or messages from her overnight. At first, he tried to reason with himself. Perhaps she stayed the night with a friend, or maybe she had an early start somewhere. But deep down, he knew this wasn't like her. Christy was the kind of person who always checked in. A quick text, a short call. She never left people worrying. Danny dialed her number several times, only to hear the call go straight to voicemail. He waited, pacing, then tried again. Still nothing. As the morning stretched on, unease began to harden into panic. He reached out to her mother, Debbie Boyd, hoping she might have heard something. But when Debbie picked up and heard that her daughter hadn't come home, a sense of dread washed over her. Debbie knew her daughter's routines. She knew that silence was not one of them. The two of them began calling Christy's friends and coworkers, hoping someone might know where she was or if she'd mentioned new plans. But no one had heard from her since the previous evening. Her phone remained off. There was no sign of recent messages, no activity on social media, no transactions on her bank card. It was as if her night had simply stopped mid-sentence. By 10 a.m., the family decided there was no time to waste. They contacted the San Jose Police Department and officially reported Christy as missing. The initial response was cautious, procedural. The police clarified. Perhaps Christy left of her own free will. Perhaps she needed time. But relatives insisted. This was not her style. Christy always stayed in touch, especially before an important interview. She was organized and responsible. The police, despite the procedural caution, recorded the request and began collecting information. They contacted the Thunder Valley Casino, requested video recordings, and began to find out who Christy had spoken to on her last evening. Meanwhile, the family began their own actions. They called hospitals, morgues, fire stations, published posts on the internet, distributed photographs. Danny drove along possible routes, checking if there had been an accident. The family printed out leaflets and posted them within a radius of dozens of kilometers from Lincoln. Every hour seemed like an eternity to them. Every minute without an answer was a direct blow to the chest. The anxiety grew more and more. There was less and less hope for a simple explanation. By lunchtime the next day, police confirmed that Christy's car had been found in the casino parking lot. It was locked and appeared to be undamaged. Her keys, phone, and purse were missing. The discovery was the first warning sign for Placer County Police, who soon became involved. The disappearance was now viewed as potentially criminal. They decided to conduct a full sweep of the casino grounds, interviewing staff and other patrons. Investigators began analyzing surveillance footage to track Christy's final movements around the building and grounds. That's when they first saw the figure of a man leaving the building with her at 1:13 a.m. From that moment on, the case began to unfold in a completely new direction. But in the first 24 hours after her disappearance, all the family and investigators had was confusion, fear, and a growing sense that something far more sinister lay behind the seemingly ordinary night. The Christy Wilson case was especially alarming to investigators. This was not just the disappearance of an adult woman. This was a situation in which it was clear from the first hours that something had gone wrong. Christy did not have a habit of suddenly disappearing, not answering calls or changing plans without warning. She was organized, disciplined, and attentive. That is why her sudden disappearance on the night of October 4th to 5th, 2005 was not only a shock to her loved ones, but also a signal to the police that the case could be criminal in nature. The first steps of the investigation were focused on restoring Christy's last known route. CCTV cameras at Thunder Valley Casino became a key source of information. The video clearly showed the girl leaving the premises in the company of an unknown man. Thanks to details of clothing, gait, and other signs, investigators were able to quickly establish his identity. It turned out to be Mario Garcia. His name had not previously appeared in police reports, and at first glance, He did not arouse suspicion. A respected healthcare worker, a father of 3, a stable life in Auburn. It seemed like a profile that would be unlikely to be involved in the disappearance. But upon closer examination of Garcia's profile, disturbing details began to emerge. Investigators had doubts after their first interview with him. His version of events was vague and inconsistent. He claimed that he left the casino with Christy, they talked for a while near her car, and then she left. However, there was no video evidence of Christy getting into her car. Moreover, the car itself was found later, but on the opposite side of the supposed exit. This inconsistency seemed suspicious to investigators. Even more alarming was Garcia's condition the day after his disappearance. When he was first interviewed, he had fresh scratches on his face and body. He explained that he had injured himself while repairing furniture, but investigators knew that such injuries often occur during physical struggle. Forensic experts recorded the damage and photographed it. The next step in the investigation was to obtain a search warrant for Garcia's car, and this was the turning point. Hair and drops of blood were found in the trunk of his car. DNA testing confirmed that they belonged to Christy Wilson. Christy had never met Garcia before and had no personal or professional ties to him. Therefore, logic dictated one thing: something illegal had happened in the car. And Garcia was the only one who could know what exactly. However, even with this evidence, the investigation faced significant difficulties. The main one was the lack of a body. Without a body, the prosecutor's office could not directly prove the fact of murder, and the defense could claim that Christy was alive but was hiding for some reason. Such theories appeared in the media. Someone claimed that she had run away. That she could have been the victim of an accident. But her bank accounts, phone, driver's license, everything remained motionless. None of her friends or relatives heard from her. And most importantly, according to her relatives, she would never have left her mother. This argument became the cornerstone of understanding Christy's motives and character. In an attempt to gather additional information, investigators turned to Garcia's circle. His wife, who initially defended her husband, became increasingly distant with each passing day. Relatives and neighbors began to recall oddities in his behavior. He became withdrawn, irritable, and avoided talking about what had happened. Some recalled that on the night of Christy's disappearance, the lights were on in his house until the early hours, and that in the morning he looked tired and tense. One of the neighbors reported hearing him digging something in the yard behind the house, although he usually did not do this. But at that time, this information did not seem specific enough. The investigation, despite the absence of a body, did not stop. The police conducted numerous searches, including Garcia's property and adjacent wooded areas, but all were fruitless. They used search dogs, helicopters, even volunteers. But Christy's tracks seemed to disappear. The girl's mother, Debbie Boyd, did not give up. She regularly appeared in the media, organized events in her daughter's memory, and even conducted her own investigation, gathering information unavailable to the police. It was her persistence that kept the case from fading from public view. By 2006, investigators had collected enough evidence to charge Mario Garcia with first-degree murder, despite the absence of a body. This decision was not easy. The jury had to believe in guilt without a key element, without a victim. But detailed examinations, inconsistencies in Garcia's stories, his behavior after the disappearance, and DNA evidence made him the main and only suspect. Investigators built a chain of evidence based on circumstantial but convincing data. They believed that even if a body was not found, this did not mean that the crime did not take place, and Garcia was the person who knew what happened that night. However, the closeness of the Garcia family, legal protection, and the lack of direct witnesses did not allow the case to be brought to a quick conclusion. It took months for the investigation to conduct all the examinations, prepare the materials, and build a case so that it would withstand the pressure from the defense. A team of prosecutors specializing in cases without a body was created, and it was their experience that brought the case to trial. But the story of Christy Wilson's investigation took a new turn almost 15 years later. In 2020, one of Garcia's sons, now an adult, remembered details of the night that he had previously ignored. How his father told him and his brother not to leave the room, how he heard digging outside the window, how the backyard looked different in the morning. This information forced the police to return to Garcia's property, which has since changed hands. Using ground-penetrating radar, violations were recorded in the ground. On August 16, 2020, excavations began. The earth was removed in layers, carefully, manually, so as not to damage possible evidence. Within an hour and a half, a team of investigators discovered human at a depth of about a meter. Fragments of clothing and material that could preserve DNA were removed. And that's when, 14 years, 10 months, and 21 days after she went missing, Christy Wilson's body was found. The jewelry Christy was wearing on the day she went missing was found with the body. A thin bracelet and earrings. These items confirmed the identity before lab tests were completed. The forensic examination lasted several weeks. The main task was not only to establish the identity, but also to determine the cause of death, the nature of the injuries, and the possible circumstances of the murder. An examination made it possible to highlight key points. Forensic experts came to the conclusion that the injury was received during life and could have been the cause of death or one of them. The experts indicated that this was not an accidental injury. Moreover, no signs were found that indicated suicide or an accident. The clothing matched the description given by Christy's mother in the first days after her disappearance. The discovered fabric and soil around the body were sent for chemical analysis. Remarkably, the soil contained microparticles that matched the composition of the materials previously found in the trunk of Garcia's car. This technically linked the site, which played a key role in the legal consolidation of evidence. Forensic psychologists would later call this one of the most sinister elements of the case, the realization of how carefully the killer had hidden death in everyday life. For investigators, the results of the examination were the last missing link that would close the case forever. They proved Christy Wilson had been murdered, with intent. Her mother, Debbie Boyd, said quietly but firmly, "Now I know where my daughter is. She's not in limbo anymore." This discovery marked the end of the investigation, but not the end of the story. There was a trial ahead. And although the body had finally been found, the answers, why, how, for what, remained as frighteningly unclear as on the first day. At this point, the prosecution gained new momentum. The discovery of Christy's body was a key link that strengthened the existing evidence base. The prosecution had what it had been missing since 2005, direct confirmation that Christy was dead and that her death was not accidental. This put an end to speculation about whether she could have voluntarily disappeared. Now prosecutors were preparing to retry the case in full, with corroborated physical evidence. The trial was taking place in Placer County. By this point, Mario Garcia was already serving his sentence, having been convicted of Christy's murder back in 2006 based on circumstantial evidence. However, the discovery of the body opened the door to a retrial and new charges, and it finally strengthened the prosecution's case. Prosecutors used this new phase of the trial to reconstruct the entire events of that night, from Christy's exit from the casino to her final moments. The focus was on the chronology, the defendant's behavior, physical evidence, and witness testimony, including his own son. The prosecution presented the court with a complete sequence of events. Casino footage clearly showed Christy and Garcia playing at the same table, flirting and chatting. After midnight, they left the room together. Then came the moment when cameras recorded them walking toward the parking lot. The footage in the parking lot stopped, and from that moment on, Christy's whereabouts became unknown. The defense tried to object. Garcia's lawyers insisted on the lack of an obvious motive, argued that the relationship between Garcia and Christy was coincidental, and that the discovery of her on his former property could not serve as the only evidence of intent. However, their arguments sounded less and less convincing. Given the body of evidence, from DNA testing to the defendant's behavior in the days following her disappearance, the defense's version did not look like an alternative hypothesis, but rather an attempt to delay the inevitable. Mario Garcia did not admit his guilt either during the investigation or in court. He denied any involvement in the disappearance and death of Christy Wilson throughout the entire trial, from 2005 until the very end. His defense was based on the fact that he allegedly broke up with Christy in a casino parking lot and did not know what happened to her next. When her body was found on his former property in 2020, even after that, Garcia did not give any confession or explain the motive for the crime. As for the possible motive, the investigation and the prosecution put forward the following version. Garcia, being married and the father of 3 children, met Christy at the casino that night. He flirted with her. But when she most likely refused or expressed dissatisfaction with his behavior, this caused an outburst of aggression in him. There are circumstantial indications that there was a struggle between them, possibly in the car. Christy's mother, Debbie, was again in the courtroom. Everything that she had gone through over these years, sleepless nights, searches, media pressure, conversations with reporters, volunteer groups, the pressure of disappointment, all concentrated in these days of the trial. She listened to expert testimony, looked at photographs of evidence, met the eyes of the man whom she considered responsible for the death of her daughter. And although the body was found and the truth seemed to triumph, for her it was not a triumph, but the end of a long and exhausting struggle. The jury deliberated briefly. By an overwhelming majority, they found Mario Garcia guilty. The judge ruled that the final sentence was life in prison without parole. That decision meant that Garcia would never walk free again. A few months after the verdict, he died in prison from complications of COVID-19 pneumonia. For Christy's family, that day was not a celebration. It was a day of silence. A day to finally stop searching, stop doubting, stop asking. Christy had come home. And though her life had been cut brutally short, her memory remained. In the people who refused to let her story disappear, in the mother who refused to give up, and in the justice that, despite years of silence, was finally served.